This podcast is about all things related to a disparate community of Americans without a name. We are the AM, A-M-M. A for Arab, M for Muslim, and another M for Middle Eastern. By heritage and American by choice or circumstance. But more importantly, we are separated and alienated from each other. It's time to get in front of the racist PR, clean out the cobwebs, and get to the business of defining ourselves. We are here to elevate AM voices. You ready to hear some tough truths? I am Banafshe Madai-Nejad.
This is Ramesh Dean.
I'm Roy Casagrande, and this is The Defining Moment. So the second modernity is actually, Egypt is going to play an extremely important role, and at some level, it may have pushed it over. Like if you didn't buy that second modernity had started by the time Egypt does it, it definitely isn't full place because of Egypt. So it's not necessarily that Egypt doesn't start the second modernity, but Egypt may be the thing that pushes it into being a full-fledged modernity. The second modernity probably should be credited to northern Iraq and Persia, actually. The Neo-Babylonian Empire did a lot in terms of sort of founding the institutions. Actually, the Assyrians did, too. The Assyrians built the world's first aqueduct. Okay, so the first bridge that bridged water over another body of water was done in Egypt. So I don't know how you do this, but I want to credit the Assyrians with something.
Give them anything.
Just something. So we're going to give them the aqueduct. It was right about 800 BC. In any case, one of the reason the aqueduct is so important, of course, is because you can now bring water to locations you couldn't before, and it dramatically expands your agricultural output. Another major important innovation, of course, is the advent of coins. Now, there's an argument about the exact location where coins popped up, and the argument is, was it Ionia or Lydia? The kingdom of Lydia it's not Greek. I think everybody wants it to be Greek. They were the indigenous population living in what is today Western Turkey. They created a kingdom that owned the western half of Turkey. Traditionally, the credit has been with them for having created the first coins, but we now have some pretty good archaeology that suggests the coins were actually created by Ionians. Ionians were Greek colonists in Western Turkey. So it might not have been the Lydians, but it was right next door to Lydia in any case, right about 650 BC. Another major innovation that needed to take place to create the second modernity was the creation of the Persian Empire by Kurosh, Cyrus. Kurosh the Great didn't just create another empire.
That's an imperial ass name, let's say. Oh.
What was that?
That speaking of names, that is an imperial name. That name deserves an empire. Yeah. Oof.
Yeah. For sure.
No PPs here. It's a strong name.
Yeah, absolutely. What he did was he created a really strange empire. It wasn't voluntary. He conquered your ass, just so we're clear. But once you were conquered, he basically immediately forgave everybody. There were no prison camps, nothing like that. There were no mass executions. And he immediately made your country a full member of the empire. So it wasn't that your country now was conquered and was going to be looted and subjugated. Your country was now a full member with all the rights of everybody else. And I mean the word rights in totally, because he actually created a Bill of Rights. And he had the Bill of Rights translated into every language in the empire and then distributed to everybody so they knew what their rights were. And they included things like the right to freedom of religion. They included the right to not be part of a human sacrifice ceremony.
All right.
Yeah, he abolished slavery.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah. So when people say things like, well, slavery, it fit the morals of the 19th century, we shouldn't be too harsh on people. I want to point out that in the 6th century BC, that there was a Persian who said, no, slavery is evil, we should get rid of it. But for the record, too, just so we're clear, the Greeks totally did human sacrifice. Not only did they do slavery, but they did human sacrifice. So the Greeks that we look up to were killing children and burying them under temples to dedicate the temple, and then the Persians, whom we villainize and hate, thought this was a hideous thing, and we're not.
Well, Persians have to be barbarians, and that's it.
And right, and it can't be skin color because the Greeks are just as dark. Anyway, so
didn't the Greeks famously sort of? I remember reading somewhere that they would decry the Persians as too sort of pale and flabby and feminine, right?
Oh, yeah. That makes total sense. Yeah. So those are major important steps. The thing, though, that throws it over the edge, the thing that makes it so that it is definitely a modernity, like way more so than the 18th dynasty, is what happens under the Ptolemaic dynasty, the 32nd Egyptian dynasty in Alexandria. What Ptolemy the First Soter, what he does is he's going to found the Great Library and the Great Lighthouse. And for the record, he picked to rule Egypt. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon, he grabbed Alexander's body, went to Egypt, killed the general in charge of Egypt, and took over Egypt because he believed Egypt was the best piece of real estate in the empire.
Smart move.
And the reason he liked it so much wasn't just the trade, and it wasn't just because of the grain. It was also because of the tech. He believed that if you could out-technology everybody else, you could defeat them. And that's why he founds the Great Library. He realizes that there's so much information, it needs to be categorized, cataloged, and put into a location that's accessible.
Prior to this, did we have things like libraries, things like universities? I know that there were probably imperial archives that people held, but did we have centers of knowledge like a library?
So the answer is yes. The Egyptians had books. They didn't necessarily have them all in one repository, though. They would have been scattered throughout temples and people's homes. So there wasn't a location like that. They did have academies. Another way to think of it is a college. The ancient Egyptians probably created the world's first ever academy about 5,000 years ago, and it was a medical academy. By the way, women served as the heads of those medical academies, just for the record.
Oh.
Ancient Egypt was gender egalitarian, probably about as high as any state has ever achieved in human experience, except maybe Iceland. And of course, New Zealand is now competing. They'll catch up probably. So that was also another interesting hallmark of Egyptian civilization, was that women really were equals. I mean, to the point where there were women pharaohs. The level of equality was shocking. Women owned their sexuality. They owned businesses. They had major roles in the government. In any case, the Great Library wasn't an academy. It was a university. So I'm not sure that this is true, but I think it is, and that is that the Great Library was the first full-fledged university in the sense that it tried to study every single subject there was, which is why it's university universe as opposed to college, which would just be one subject matter. The Great Library was more than just a library. It was also a museum. In fact, that's where we get the word museum. They had a section of it called Museon, which got Latinized into museum. And it wasn't what we think of today, where you have like art or antiquities. It was all the high-tech stuff on display. And anybody from anywhere on the planet was invited to come there to see it, because the assumption was, like Tesla batteries, if you don't copyright it, they'll innovate it, and then you build off of their innovation. So that was what that was for. And it also had classrooms and professors. It was just think a university. The Great Lighthouse was an attempt to improve trade. And the reason why they wanted to build it was, up until the Great Lighthouse was built, when you wanted to go to Egypt, you had to skirt the coast. Well, the Eastern Mediterranean is rectangular. So you're going and then dropping down. But if you could go straight across, you could cut days off of your journey. And the straight across was from Crete to Alexandria. So when they built the reason they built the Great Lighthouse and they made it so tall is if I'm on a mast and you're on a mast, I can see you about 7 miles away. Because the Earth is curved. Like, if the Earth was flat, I could see you way more than 7 miles, but because of the curve, I know, it's not actually curved, but it really is curved, it turns out. In fact, the Egyptians figured that out. In the 6th century BC, they sent an expedition around Africa, and they noticed the sun's position in the sky changed, and then they saw new star constellations, and then they got to the southern tip of Africa, and they went back up, and everything got restored, and they went, oh, there's only one possible explanation. It has to be a sphere. So, what they wanted to overcome at Alexandria was, so if I build if I build a really tall tower, I can get seen from further away. The tower was tall enough you could see it from 40 miles away. But Crete is 200 miles away. So 40 miles away isn't enough. They needed something else. So here's what they did. They invented a laser.
A laser?
And they shot the laser beam into the sky, and you could see it 100 miles away. Because then you're not looking at the Great Lighthouse. So all you got to do is see the laser beam in the sky, and you can just follow the laser beam in. And we don't know how they did it. We just know they did it, and you could see it from 100 miles away.
What? A laser?
Yeah. A laser beam. And if you ever got off course, you just headed to the laser beam and you got back on course. They were doing brain surgery.
Wait, you've got to explain this one. Oh my goodness.
We know the people survived because we have their mummies.
Oh, so you have
We have mummified people who had brain surgery, and you can see where they cut a hole in the skull and they removed a piece and then stuck it back on, and you can see how much recalcification there was, and you can measure that, and now you know how long the person lived after surgery. And I read about one case where the person lived 7 years after the surgery.
Oh, wow. Man.
We don't know what condition, because there's no brain to examine. We don't know what they took out or what they put in. But we know they were doing it. And if they were doing it multiple times, it must have been successful. You wouldn't keep doing it if it wasn't. I told you that the pyramids were a perfect compass. But, just think about what went into making them. They were granite. So it's confusing because when we see the pyramids, we see the limestone. But inside it, there's a granite skeleton. But the granite blocks aren't shaped like blocks. They're interlocking. And they had to hold them up into the air at the same time. And some of the big blocks are 80 tons. So they range from 2 to 80 tons. They held them up into the air at the same time, and then they let them go, and they slid into place and then locked.
That's beautiful.
And then they put the limestone blocks as filler.
Uh-huh.
And then you put the granite casing on the outside. So, but here's the crazy thing. They were a Bronze Age society. You can't cut granite with bronze. And so, Ptolemy's looking at this, goes, I want that. I want whatever is going on here. That's what I want a part of. And the Great Library becomes his great gift to humanity, because now books are coming from India and China and Persia and Greece, and they're going to the Great Library. And at first, all the library wants is to have it. And then as time goes by, they start translating it. And they're translating it into Greek because that was the language of the Ptolemies. And then, to take things one step further, they followed in Kourosh's footsteps in creating this Society of Tolerance. And it was so important to them that Alexandria very quickly became the largest Jewish city on the planet at the time. The Jews had a whole quarter. And within one generation, the Jews stopped speaking Aramaic. Huh. They already weren't really speaking Hebrew anymore, but they had basically lost contact with Aramaic and Hebrew. And the pharaoh, his name was Ptolemy II Philadelphus. He decided this was unacceptable. Mm. And so he got 70-something, we don't know the exact number, rabbis together, and he had each one of them translate the holy text, the Jewish holy text, into Greek, so that the Jews in Alexandria would have access to their holy text. And that's the Septuagint. It's called the Septuagint because it was 70-something rabbis. And he did 70-something because he knew one rabbi is going to have errors. They're going to have bias. But if you have 77, then you just merge them together and you'll get rid of the bias and the errors. So when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we could compare the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Septuagint. It's spot on. It was an amazing translation. And that's what Christians use today. They're using the Septuagint.
That is such an incredible level of investment in what would have been like a minority community for him, right?
Yeah.
How much do you have to care about, this random minority community in some block of the city or whatever, their long-term communal history and access to religion to be able to make that kind of investment? That's beautiful.
Isn't it incredible? Like, I can't even imagine a society today going, oh, God, that minority over there, they can't read their holy text. It sucks. Let's fix this. Like, today, it'd be like, oh, I hope they die, too.
Yeah, let's... Wow. So this is the second approach to modernity. We have convenience here. Okay.
And that one is I can't believe I missed this step, but you can see where my brain is. So we did the Syrians and the Persians, and then the coin, which was either Lydian or Ionian, and then of course there was Greek philosophy before the Great Library, and that
a small footnote.
Yeah, just Plato. That's nothing. And that also ends up then at the Great Library. And so all of that is being brought together and it's being turned up, and they're creating new technologies. At the Great Library, they're going to invent geometry. At the Great Library, they're going to make the world's first ever steam engine. The first ever rocket. It's a steam-powered rocket. It couldn't go anywhere because it had to be hooked up to the steam engine, so it just spun in circles. So it was a static rocket that spun in circles. They created a mechanical play with gears. For decades, everybody assumed that the gear was invented 200 years ago. It was invented at least 2,000 years ago. They had gears in ancient Egypt. And what happened was you turned on the steam engine, and then it caused these gears to shift, and as it did, it would change scenes. It was a mechanical play.
Oh my goodness.
And it would make sound effects. It was like the world's first ever analog TV.
Wow. And that's for entertainment. This isn't even some like giant militaristic operation or production. That's entertainment.
Just pure entertainment at that point. And then they had a computer. And we have one. This isn't speculation. We have a copy of it. It's called the Antikythera device. It was found off the coast of Antikythera in the Aegean. At first, everybody just thought it was a metal box and nobody could figure out what it was. And then somebody had the genius idea of x-raying it. And inside are gears. And what you did was you entered the date, and it would tell you the location of the constellations in the sky.
What?
It was a computer. It was a mechanical computer, like the computer that Herman Hollerith invented in 1902. It was also a mechanical computer. You put in the punch cards, and levers dropped down, and if there was a hole, it turned a dial and clicked the number, and if there wasn't a hole, it didn't go through. It's the same thing. It's just a mechanical computer. It's an analog computer.
This really fucks up entirely my notion of history as a teleology, right? Like we're constantly improving, and we get to some peak stage. No, not at all.
No. In fact, you don't want to get to the peak stage because you know what comes after.
Yeah.
The roller coaster ride down. And so what ends up happening is, to make a long story short, this ancient Egyptian, ancient Greek, ancient Persian, right? Because the Persians are totally a part of this. The civilization is thriving. It's creating new technology. It's going places. And then the Romans come into the scene.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So just to put it out there, I am 1/8 Italian. I am totally proud of my Italian and Roman heritage. This is not me like doing some kind of weird racist thing. When I watch Gladiator, my favorite part of that movie is that first 15 minutes when they're tearing up the Germans. It is so beautiful. It's art. the Romans were good at this. They knew how to kill. They did it in an artful way. I'm also 5/30 seconds German, so I also get confused during those scenes. Because I'm rooting for both sides. My point in saying all that is because what the Romans do is really detrimental for humanity. So the Romans weren't inventors. I know. Everybody thinks the Romans invented the aqueducts. I just said the Assyrians and the Egyptians did, so that's gone. The Romans made great aqueducts. They didn't invent the aqueduct. It's like saying the Americans, it's like Henry Ford invented the car. No, Henry Ford was making cars for Oldsmobile before he founded the Ford Motor Company. How could he have invented the car? Daimler invented the car. It's just such a huge difference. Benjamin Franklin didn't invent the eyeglasses. He invented bifocals. Right? It's sloppy thinking. It's like thinking that hypothesis and theory mean the same thing. What Romans didn't invent roads. That actually makes no sense. The fact that anybody ever said that makes me think, wow, you didn't think this thing through. The first person to walk from point A to point B 17 times invented the first road. It might have been a sucky road, but it was a road. What people, I think, mean is the first paved road. And again, the Romans don't get that. Egyptians invented the world's first paved road about 5,000 years ago. They paved a road with stone. Actually, it was petrified wood. Oh. So it's just like crazy petrified wood road. You gotta wonder what was going through their minds when they found the petrified wood.
Why?
What kind of wood is this? I don't know, but it'd make a great paving surface. What the Romans did do is they used concrete to pave their roads. And that was an important innovation. But like all innovations that the Romans did, they didn't invent anything. What they did was if they did anything, they improved on somebody else's invention, but usually they didn't even do that. What the Romans did was they got a hold of the Greek phalanx. Mm-hmm. And they Romanized it and made the Roman legion.
Yeah.
And the Roman legion was an incredible killing machine. You just couldn't stop this thing. And what the Romans would do is they would conquer neighboring countries, steal their tech, steal their wealth, and then enslave them. Like, for example, when Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, there were 3 million people in Gaul. He murdered 1 million. He enslaved 1 million. And then he Romanized the remaining million. But here's the crazy thing. At the time, France was covered in gold mines, and then he plundered all the gold. And he took the million that he enslaved and sold them, and he made crazy money off of the project. And the Celts living in Gaul, the French, precursors to the modern French, were metallurgists. And they had metallurgy tech that the Romans didn't have. And as a result, the Romans literally just stole that metallurgy tech and they ended up upgrading. That's what the Romans did. So as long as there was a new place to conquer that had tech they didn't have, Roman civilization could advance. In 31 BC, they luck out and they conquer Egypt. Because Marcus Antony and Cleopatra Cleopatra VII blow this thing at the Battle of Actium. When the Romans conquered Egypt, they ended up with the Great Library. Now they're not as dependent on conquest to get new tech. And it allows them a little bit of breathing space so the empire doesn't have to keep expanding. And because at some point they expand too much. They can't sustain it. That probably would have been okay. That would have been an okay arrangement, except for what happens next. So we have found Roman pots in Madagascar. Now, they didn't get to Madagascar because Romans brought them there. What happened was the Romans had pots that they sold in Egypt, and then traders took those pots from Egypt, probably to India, and then from India they ended up in Indonesia. And apparently at some point down the way, Indonesian fishermen ended up with those pots, and those Indonesian fishermen went all the way across the Indian Ocean and landed in Madagascar, thought, oh my God, this place is cool, and then colonized it.
Oh.
Madagascar is I-AMM.
Oh my God.
The eastern half of Madagascar is populated by Indonesians, and then slaves were brought over And so the western half of Madagascar is black. They were enslaved and brought over. Madagascar's initial native population were Indonesians.
Whoa.
Isn't that a mind screw? And they brought rice with them.
Ah.
And then, as they're trading with Africa, they started trading the rice with the African population. Africans began growing rice. How do you grow rice? You flood a field. What happens when you flood a field? Malarial mosquitoes.
Oh.
All of a sudden, there's a malaria pandemic that originates in southern Africa and spreads north. And by the time we get to the 3rd century AD, malaria is hammering Egypt. Egypt's population just plunges. And malaria hit Greece, it hit Turkey, it hit Rome, it hit Italy, it hit Spain, it hit Syria. All of a sudden, the entire Mediterranean's population plunges to the point where millions are dead. The life expectancy goes from probably 45 to 25. It's a catastrophe. Their whole Mediterranean civilization begins unraveling. And in the midst of all of that, there's this brand new Abrahamic religion that was just a little side cult that almost nobody partook in, that is totally focused not on the here now, but the hereafter. Because, right, the Greeks, they didn't just have a pantheon that didn't give a shit about anything, really. Their whole focus was the here now, and the gods were like that. The gods were like rapists, and they're petty and backstabbing. But Christianity is, this life doesn't matter. Your whole goal is to avoid sin, make Jesus and God happy. They're the same thing, by the way. I know that's confusing. There's even a third component, just to really screw with you. And then, if you do, you'll get this really amazing afterlife. Mm-hmm. And if your life expectancy is 25...
that's all good.
You can suddenly make sense of the fact that you're going to be dead at 25. And the Mediterranean mass converts to Christianity, leaving behind the Egyptian pantheon and the Greek pantheon and the Roman pantheon, because of this pandemic crisis that has left everything in a state of ruin. And that's in the 3rd century AD. Rome actually collapsed. Rome fell apart in the third. The malarial pandemics just crippled Rome. And then Diocletian puts it back together. Emperor Constantine comes along and makes Christianity legal. 90 years later, Christianity is not only the official religion of the Roman Empire, it is the only legal religion of the Roman Empire. In 391, the Roman Empire declares all non-Christians are anathema. Emperor Theodosius I. And then the Archbishop of Alexandria, Archbishop Theophilus I, decides that Alexandria must be purged of its non-Christians. It was 50% Christian, a quarter Jewish, and a quarter pagan. And a mob of Christians go through the city, tearing it up. Their end location is the Great Library, and they burn it down.
Oh my God.
According to Carl Sagan, we lost 500 years when the Great Library was burnt. Another way to think of it is, we wouldn't have landed on the moon in 1969, we would have landed in 1469. And that's the end of that, modernity.
Damn the Indonesians.
And you drew the proper conclusion. This is all Indonesia's fault. Unfortunately, somebody's going to draw that conclusion. Yeah. Some apologist for Christian mobs is going to go, no,
it's the Indonesians.
It's the Indonesians that messed this up. If it was for the Indonesians, I wouldn't even be Christian.
That's a whirlwind. I'm sorry. I've got a... Oof.
That's crazy. It's not the history we were taught in the schools.
No one told me this.
Nothing. Everything I was taught was wrong. It was a lie. Just wrong.